Well, good evening, everybody. We are absolutely thrilled to have you here for our first Tarragon Talk of the season. My name is Payne. I am the Associate Artistic Director here at Tarragon. So as we gather on this land upon which Tarragon is built, it is critical for us to not only acknowledge that the majority of us are settlers, but that we also commit ourselves to reflect on and respond to our relationship to the land around us. Toronto, colonially called Toronto, is stewarded by the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Each of us, being here, are bound by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Agreement. This is an agreement done on Treaty 13 land between us, new settlers, the colonizers, and the indigenous people. The dish is the land, and the one spoon is meant so that we share equally and not take more than what is needed. It is a lawful and legitimate treaty and should be treated as any law we follow on this land. Of course, these treaties are not taken with the same legitimacy as some things as simple as a seatbelt law. I'm a settler, and I'm here only because of the islands that my parents came from happen to also be affected by the colonialist system. There, those colonizers and the transatlantic slave trade decimated the indigenous populations of the Taino, the Arawak, and the Kareda people. What I hope through an acknowledgement like this one is that we are reminded of our relationship with ourselves, the indigenous nations around us, and all of the unnamed and unrecorded people who have crossed over this land. The Dish with One Spoon Treaty means that we should peacefully share and hold this land sacred, and I really hope that you all do when you leave here today. So as we work to grow new stories here at Tarragon, we hope to add to Toronto's oral history and find and unearth the lost stories that rest within the soil that we tread on each day. For our part, Tarragon is donating a portion of proceeds to organizations that seek to bring justice to the survivors of the residential, or rather assimilation schools, and their families. We also seek to bring attention and voice to all missing, murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit individuals in this country. Lastly, we invite you to join us on this journey forward, acknowledging and taking shared responsibility when it comes to the history of this land. We ask you to consider actively engaging in restitution, decolonization, and allyship wherever you have the time to do so. If you would like to donate or would like more information, please check the land acknowledgement page on our website. We have a lot of different links there for more information if you would like to know. And with all of that being said, thank you again for being here for our conversation around Cockroach this evening with these two lovely guests beside me, and I will let you introduce yourselves and please tell people who you are.
Hi, my name is Damon Jang. I am a performer and emerging director, choreographer, arts educator, hailing from the unceded and stolen lands of Vancouver. I am currently a part of the Stratford Festival Conservatory as the very first Asian Canadian directing candidate in the Birmingham Conservatory, and I'm on loan right now as our associate director for Cockroach, and I use he/him pronouns.
Yay! Aaron, Jan, he, him, not on loan. I'm here. Having fun. I'm a director, dramaturg, playwright, and kind of new musical theater book writer, which is weird and new to me. I'm the Urjo Kareda artist in residence at Tarragon, where I'm developing a weird play about table tennis. I don't know, I'm excited to talk about bugs.
Yeah, we mostly came here to talk about Cockroach, which is weirdly enough not about cockroaches.
But we have to clap it.
So Cockroach is a story by Ho Ka-ki, Jeff Ho, which actually, the term cockroach is a racial slur for those who are protesting within the country of Hong Kong. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of the history of Hong Kong. I would like to say that everybody should look into it. What I will talk about is its correlation to this story. So Hong Kong is a place that is known to be a place with two systems at play. The two systems are because, well, colonialism. Britain leased Hong Kong from the Chinese people for 150 years. where they implemented different ways of assimilating the population within that country towards more of an Anglophone way of thinking. and being, or a more Eurocentric way of thinking and being. One of their assimilation tools happened to be the texts of Shakespeare, which they made sure to put in all education systems that were in Hong Kong. So they were very much inundated by Shakespearean text. The reason why I talk about the one place, two systems is because Cockroach is a story about one boy who goes through a traumatic split and ends up with two voices, two splinters of the boy. One represents more so a mainland China idealistic way of thinking or ideal way of thinking. And then the other side is represented by the bard, which is the anglicized English way of thinking. And they hold these two spaces within this boy's body and try to help him through a moment. And so within our conversation today, I wanted to talk a little bit about really these artists' state within this world that we live in, their progress through their careers in theater, and what that means to them to have an identity that is holding two different identities, right? So we have our identity of Canadianness, but we also have our perceived heritage identity. So when looking at these two individuals, obviously, we know that and myself as well, obviously, we wouldn't necessarily be the thing that people would say, oh, you are immediately Canadian. People will ask you where you're from, and you're from somewhere else, obviously, or would have been. So I would like to ask the two of you, what are your heritage? And how does your heritage play within your work?
I'm biracial, so I'm 3/4 Chinese and 1/4 European. So mostly Chinese. I'm third generation, so my parents were born here, and my grandparents from my mom's side, or my dad's side, is from the Guangzhou province. So I have a little bit of relationship with my cultural heritage. It hasn't really come up a lot in my artistic body of work. I deeply, deeply regret not writing down or recording more of those stories of how my grandmother came to Canada, because it's very powerful, and a lot of my older family members have since passed away because of that, or just because of life and things like that. So I haven't been able to write that down. So now it's just a story that has been just passed on orally. But I haven't done anything with it, so that's the one piece of connection that I have culturally, but it hasn't really showed up in my work as of yet.
Yeah, and you, Aaron?
It's interesting because I'm full mainlander scum Chinese, but the thing is, my grandparents ran away from Mao in two different directions. So on my mom's side, because you want to get rid of all the academics. So on my mom's side, they ran to a small town called Levac, which is north of Sudbury, and they ran the only Chinese restaurant. They were the only Chinese people in this mining community. And my dad's parents ran to India, where my dad was raised in Shantiniketan, learned Hindi, lost all of his Hindi, and they met in a terrible little city called Hamilton, which is where I'm from. Hamilton. But yeah, so even though I think that I am Chinese, I don't really feel that Chinese a lot.
And do either of you speak the language?
No. I was made in my brother's image, so my brother flunked out of Chinese school, so they assumed, you can't do that. It was the same with horseback riding. My brother was on the horse, and they were like, you must get on the horse, and I was like, oh no. But oddly enough though, my kind of third generation Chineseness, I can't speak to any of my grandparents who were bullied as children and are too scared to speak English, mostly on my mom's side. A lot of my work is impacted by my Chineseness, but also feeling that strange sense of yes, I look Chinese, but a lot of my values are Western. The way I understand affection is Western. The way I navigate through the world is Western. So my work is greatly informed by that. My work empowers and explores why third generation Chinese Canadians hurt each other. I'm fascinated by that thing. That is I'm so tired of narratives, and that's why I love this play so much. Cockroach, although I do love Red Mountain Town, the Cockroach, is that it explores this dirt and kind of ugliness that can exist within the East Asian body, which I'm fascinated by. So yeah, it's weird. Yeah, it's kind of that weird thing of my work is greatly informed by that feeling of oh, I am this thing, where I am between worlds, but I love that about myself. And I think I remember, there's this thing on Instagram where people ask me anonymous questions. Sometimes they ask me mean things, but someone asked me, they were like, do you ever regret not learning Chinese? And my answer was always no. Because my artistry and who I am is greatly impacted by that. So yeah.
Okay, and like that really is around language, and then for you, I know for Damon, you actually had a moment with Shakespeare and being Chinese, and can you speak a little bit to that?
Right. So much like you will find out in our play, there's a reference to a line in Midsummer Night's Dream about the chink in the wall and how it's a racist line that needs to be changed. And I know that that controversy has been in the zeitgeist and the ethos here in Toronto with the production that happened at some point. In 2009, I was also cast as the chink in the wall in my college production of Midsummer. And the funny thing was, we were doing the table read, and I'll never forget this, sitting around, and the actor who plays Bottom says, "Out of my eye do I spy a chink in the wall?" And everybody just kind of stops and looks at our director for a second. And he's like, "What?" And I'm like, and he's like, "Oh, you're Asian. That's funny." It's like as if he had made some sort of like discovery in that moment that, oh wait, the only Asian person in the entire show who's also playing mechanical is cast as the chink in the wall, and he didn't make that as a conscious decision. I mean, I'll never know for certain or not. I mean, I leaned into it really heavily, and so that was my only experience in Shakespeare, apart from like serving on the Jesse jury a few years later and having to watch all the Jessies are like the Doras in Vancouver, and then now Stratford. So like those have only been my only 3 experiences living the experience of embodying the work of Shakespeare.
Could you explain chink in the wall?
Right. So in context of the play, A Midsummer Night's Dream, they're performing this play, Pyramus and Thisbe, and the character of the wall is literally a wall, and so Pyramus and Thisbe have to communicate each other through a hole, or in this case, a chink, or a kink, as we say in the play in Cockroach, kink in the wall, and so again, I'm sure. In 1500s, Shakespeare did not intend chink to be what it is known now as the slur for a Chinese person. But again, in 2009, I really leaned into it. My director was like, "Go like this," and I'm like this, and and I was like literally in a wall drape, like in a drop cloth. So there was literally a Chinese person inside of a wall, so holding out my fingers like this, simulating the hole or the chink. So that's what that refers to. Yeah.
With that being said, I think my next question now is: were either of you ever felt that you had to play stereotypes of yourselves as you were moving through theater school?
All the time. Like, I think as a part of survival in Hamilton. I remember I would see corridors of like Asian kids playing StarCraft. I'm like, I can't be you. I can't be you. Get picked on all the time. So I would surround myself with non-Asian people, and I would like be really racist toward Asian people, and that was my way of ingratiating myself into that community. And it's why I had no Chinese friends growing up, and like I didn't get bullied as a kid, and like, yeah. And I think that like the kind of breaking point for me was in theater school. We were studying the Mikado, which is, for those of you who don't know, it's a Gilbert and Sullivan operetta. Gilbert and Sullivan? No, it's not Gilbert and Sullivan.
No, it is Gilbert and Sullivan.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
Gilbert and Sullivan operetta where white people put on yellowface and they put on accents and it's supposed to be like a send-up of the British monarchy, but like as a result, East Asian people are the collateral. And I remember just being there and like my classmates were just like laughing at it and like, oh my god, they were doing little Asian accents and I was like, this is kind of messed up. And I remember sitting there and just being like, that was my kind of breaking point where I was just like, I have spent so long trying to be something I'm not to protect myself from getting hurt. But like, maybe I do need to get hurt to actually explore this art thing more because I'm not being my genuine self. So I think that was theater school had the opposite effect on me Whereas like growing up, I was like, I'm not Asian. You guys are losers. I'm going to prom. And then like after that, like in theater school, when there were no more proms, I was like, why am I doing this? And also, I feel the more I explore who I authentically am as an artist and a person, the better my work becomes. But it took that experience of like actually having my own racism shoved in my face in theater school, not out of a go die and build my railroad way, but in a way, I know, right? I wish people would say that to me. I invite that. I'm like, I don't know how, but I can try.
I don't have those skills.
I can try to build you a Lego railroad. But anyway, I'm taking so much time right now. My point is, I hadn't reflected back on me and realized I don't want that.
Right.
And that kind of changed the way I thought about things.
Yeah, I know, Damon, you're at Stratford right now.
Yeah.
And how has that been for you? Because I know that in the past they've had different issues at Stratford. However, I know that you have been working really, towards learning more about, etc. So I would love for you to talk more about that too.
Yeah. So I feel that Stratford has made a really good effort in creating what is like a 15-page dissertation on EDI, which is like equity, diversity, inclusion. So because of that, and people like Esther Jang, who's the director of development and one of the creators of something called it's a pre-rehearsal orientation. So now this is something that we do before every company does this. We spend 4 days creating a room agreement, just sitting with the company members as well as the crew, just getting and the design team, and just like everybody sort of getting to know each other, playing like kind of those corporate like getting to know you games like trust building and like all these kinds of things. But then also talking about things like anti-oppression, anti-racism act. They talk. Of course, they bring it down in our space, and they talk about how we like to work and things like that. So, in terms of visibility, or in terms of like the care that they've taken with us, I personally, I can't speak for everybody at the festival because there are issues that arise all the time. But for myself personally, I feel like I'm supported, and any time that there is ever an issue, there is people that I can go to, or because I am one of 15 people in the festival that is Asian, and I was the only person of color as the assistant director of Allswell. I was the only person of color on the creative team for that, and so there was oftentimes conversations surrounding work that I didn't feel necessarily comfortable with, that was in direct response to pro, and it didn't necessarily jive with me as a city itself. There's a couple of instances that have gone around where, and this is like kind of COVID related, not even really, or it could be even potentially racially related, but there's been a couple times when Stratford townies would drive up in their trucks and they just kind of like stare at you or look at you funny, and like we'd have to like walk in pairs, or like they'd give us like taxi chits and stuff like that, just because. And sort of circling back to the COVID thing,
Yeah.
I remember that I was bawed at for wearing I was still wearing my mask because our mask policy is still in place at the festival for acting and work, but it is off for patrons. But I was bawed at by Stratford Townie, and then I've used that word so grossly. I don't. Someone who lives in Stratford, or someone who is a local to Stratford.
But you're bought at like you were
A sheep.
like a sheep.
Like sheep. Like
you're a sheeple.
Exactly.
The pandemic is over.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So again, I don't know if that was racially related or if
just
it was
them.
just COVID related, or it could have been a combination of the two. But I think like being like at Stratford is a little strange, just because I've never lived in a small town before. But I think it's getting better. Definitely from the administration side, things are there's more work to be done, and there's always more work to be done. And I think that there's definite steps in the right direction.
I think that's very good news for those who are moving forward within this industry, to know that it's becoming a more welcoming place as we move forward. And I think think my question is, as you've moved through your careers, have you found that it's become easier for you to be your authentic selves within this community, or has it become harder?
Significantly easier. Just because I think with the recent shift of artistic directors, more folks are coming in, I don't want to use power, but it's power. More folks are coming into power who experienced things similar to what we experienced, and we're just like, we're not going to do this anymore. I think one of my favorite theater artists, Philip Aiken, would always say this. He would be like, he described it as like getting over a fence. Like, how do we hoist people over the fence the same way you're trying to get your buddy over the fence? Like, you have a foothold for them to boost them over. So I don't know, it's been, I mean, it's interesting because like I talk to a lot of artists who are like, it wasn't like this 20 years ago, and I'm like, I don't know. 20 years ago, I was 10 years old. I didn't know what was happening 20 years ago, but like, I'm lucky that I'm around now, and I'm feeling like my mobility through my career, I feel, is because the previous generation had to deal with so many things I've never had to deal with, are finding ways of making systems so they don't have to experience what they experienced when they were at our point in their careers.
I was almost ready to pack it up and quit the industry and just be an arts educator, because I found that it was harder to get into professional spaces. It was hard to have my voice heard. It was hard for me to show my agency and not be relegated to like ensemble or not be seen for certain characters, or not be, not be asked to come in for certain things or certain roles. Yeah, exactly. And so for me, with BLM and what you said, Aaron, with the trickle down of decolonization and the breakdown of systemic racism and things like that, and of traditionally white-centric or Eurocentric spaces, those voices have now been shifted in a way where we have more agency. There is more of a conversation that I'm finding about, like, is diversity just putting an Asian person or a black person or an Indigenous person on stage, or is it within the existing in the administration, in the design team, in the creative team? So it's like there are those questions. And my first show that I got to do outside of the pandemic was at the Arts Club, and I think Ashley Corcoran is a really great person. Just a shout out to the Arts Club, a collab that they're doing, Redbone Coonhound. Arts Club is really great about Ashley specifically about making sure that those voices are heard, and in terms of the way that she's doing her programming and the way that she's involving different people. I think that that's starting to happen across the board at a lot of different theater companies. Happening here specifically. Like, I have never felt, coming back to Cockroach, I've never felt more inclusive as a voice in the room with a team of people that care so much about the work and our cultural identity and just our agency that I have in our room of Cockroach. And just in terms of like, that's where I feel like this hopefully, the room that I'm in right now with Cockroach, will be the standard that all rooms should be in, where we have a very marginalized, very diverse group of individuals working in every element of our team, from sound to lighting to sets to costumes to to the creative team to our actors on stage. And so I think that this is the type of show, with Mike's leadership now being the first show to launch this new season at Tarragon, is really something that people should be coming to in order to see that kind of representation really fully in all elements of the production.
Just jump in here. It starts in schools.
Mm-hmm.
It starts in theater school.
Yeah.
Because like, I'm only here because someone in theater school believed in me and didn't try to make my voice into something else. Like, you do something interesting. Let's pursue this thread. Let's follow it. And like, I think it's just really important that theater schools are hiring artists. Like, I don't care what their ethnicity is. I will hire artists that believe in students' own important voices and their uniqueness and what makes them different and strange, and making sure they believe in themselves and they lead with rigor still. I mean, like, we're not just being like, you can't do your voice tutorial, you can still stay. But like, yeah, I think it starts with theater education. Like, having someone be like, there's something here, and if you pursue that, your strangeness is what makes you a strong artist.
Mm.
So I think that's where it begins.
I think so too. And I know that you had a different type of adventure for theater school, and I know theater school is different for both. I don't know if you wanted to talk a little
Oh,
bit
I talk
about
all the time.
I know it was weird for me, but
It
I
was weird for you. It was weird for me.
Weird for all of us.
It was very weird. Yeah, I got kicked out of my first theater school, and it's hilarious because I taught there this year. So I had a coming back moment where I walked into Toronto Metropolitan University, and I looked at teachers in my eyes that kicked me out, and they pretended not to know me, and I was like, I'm here to get my tuition money back.
Yeah.
So, but it was like, yeah, I don't know, getting kicked out of theater school actually was like such a gift for me, because it made me realize I cannot be an artist to someone else's standard. It's my strangeness, my weirdness, my idiosyncrasies that make me strong. And if I'm sitting in a room that I don't feel or I can be my full self in, where someone's trying to mold me into something, which I guess thematically goes back to this play. I keep pointing to it as like a gesture.
As we
The
all
play that you're all going to see eventually. But yeah, I think just like that experience of being rejected from an institution and being told I was nothing and being told I couldn't do things, that made me be like, no, I can. But I'll do it on my own terms. And if I'm ever in a room that makes me feel small again, I will leave that room or fight to flip it over. So yeah, I don't know, that was tell me about your trauma.
Yeah.
Well, apart from the Midsummer Nightmare, which again it wasn't even really like a bad experience, because again I leaned into it. I lean into the comedy. I'm just like, well, if you can't beat them, join them. You know, just like if you know, it's like there's a quote that was like, I'd rather laugh at myself first before anybody else can laugh at me. But like people were laughing, and like I wasn't sure whether or not it was because of like that whole thing, or whether or not it was because I'm just a funny person. But yeah, so for me, theater school, going to I went to musical theater university in North Vancouver. And it was a mostly white program, not gonna lie. And there just happened to be 3 people of color in my program, or 3 Asian people of color in my program. And one was Rosie Simon, who does a lot of work in Toronto, film and TV and theater. She's adopted by a white family, and one of my friends was half Chinese, half Caucasian. He didn't speak the language, and I didn't speak the language. So we had the most amount of Asian people in our class, the furthest away culturally from our Asian identity. So yeah, I mean, there's good things and bad things about theater school, which I could drone on and on and on about. But I think that really, in the end, the first show that we did professionally outside of theater school was the Vancouver premiere of Flower Drum Song, the musical, where we basically got 3 casts in that show just because, like, it says,
so many Asian people.
There's only so many people. There's only so many Asian people that do musical theater at that level at that time in 2009. And shout out to my buddy Richard Lamb, whose birthday it is today, who's currently at the festival starring as Laurie in Little Women. But he was in that show with me too. And so, like, again, it's like all the who's who of like Vancouver who are like around, like in Jimmy Eves starring in Kim's Convenience, and Gavin Ockway was also in that show with me. So like there was tons of people that I met, and that was the first time again feeling like that was the only other time other than Cockroach that I felt being in a room with an Asian team in an Asian-centric show together, like presenting a show that like is so part of our Asian heritage. I mean, although it's like both our shows have like colonialist ties, but like apart from theater school, like that was the only time that I felt like I was like I really truly like was marrying the 2 worlds of like my training and my cultural identity together.
Yeah.
Like to go, okay, I'm using my training as a performer, but I'm also deeply looking inwards at my own cultural identity to I mean I was playing the younger brother of the lead character, and Flower Drum Song actually has weird ties to Cockroach because the lead character is like in older, not older, but he's like a young Asian man living in San Francisco in the 1950s when like that cultural revolution was happening, and he's of two worlds as well too, where it's like he's got like his picture bride coming from China and his like super like Americanized, Linda Lowe kind of like lounge singer, and so he's fighting of those two worlds of like his Asian identity and his like newly assimilated North American identity. And I played like the younger brother who was like, yeah, baseball and like soda pop. I'm like, I'm an American boy, even though like because I was born in San Francisco, so. Yeah, I didn't have to stretch very far to play a character that was like all like super into North American culture. But yeah, I know.
What is this show?
Flower Drum Song. You've never heard of Flower Drum Song?
I've heard of it, but like you play baseball on the show?
Well,
or you talk about playing.
I just walk in wearing like a baseball hat.
That's all you need
like,
in the show.
Exactly.
I'm already sold. I'll watch it.
Right? Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. It's, so that's like the epitome of like, hey, this is why you're American. By coming in a baseball
hat.
Hello.
You are American.
You are the.
You already feel more American.
Oh, exactly.
I can feel your Americanness here.
Exactly, but yeah, exactly. But just coming back to your question about theater school, just like I think that now looking back at it, having been out of it for over a decade, I agree with Aaron. It really does shift and changes start at the institutional level. And I really hope that there's a reckoning or there's a shakeup, and I know it's happened at some institutions.
Yep.
I hope it happens all across Canada, and this is partially why I'm pursuing higher education, because not that I didn't want to teach theater at a high school, but I wanted to teach theater performance practices at a university level, because I know that I would make a greater impact at a university level, training the next generation that I was not feeling like I had anyone to turn to, having all white instructors, not really seeing myself represented and going, can I make a life in this industry? Because I don't know anyone that's working full time that embodies my cultural identity. So I think that in terms of theater school training, that's really important, especially if we want to continue to develop more and more people of color. And like I said, not only Cockroach, but I will just say, just like across Canada, Anne of Green Gables right now at Charlottetown features 2 Asian leads. Like changes are happening slowly, but it has to happen. The conversation starts at theater school.
It does, yeah, and that's where we learn most of the things that we bring out into the world, right? So we learn majority Shakespeare. We learn a lot of Shakespeare. A lot of it is actually put higher than a lot of the other stuff we learn because it legitimizes us as artists. I think is what is often said. And I know that for you've been learning more and more about Shakespeare, because being in musical theater, we don't necessarily always have that. You start with the other white granddaddies like Irving Berlin, et cetera. But as you start learning more about Shakespeare, have you found that, does it go one direction where you're like, oh, now I feel more Eurocentric than I ever did before, or do you feel yourself growing in a different direction by learning more of the text? More about it?
I was really lucky to be a part of the team for All's which features 2 IBPOC features 2 actors that are playing, Bertram and Helen, Jessica Hale and Jordan Hall. Like, I feel really lucky to be able to sit and watch them take this Eurocentric text and go, okay, they're not bringing their cultural identity necessarily into this body of work, but as I was saying this a little bit earlier, Shakespeare is a language like anything else, and so sitting in the room and listening to it, absorbing it, I learned more and more about it and more understanding of it. Whereas before I was scared, I felt like an imposter in that space, not feeling like I belonged there because I didn't have that level of experience. But the more and more I sat with it, the more I watched it being crafted by these amazing artists in our company. Not only the older Caucasian Stratford lifers, but like the young company of IBPOC individuals. I realized that there is a universality to this language, and while it is Eurocentric in its nature, there is so much that can be drawn from the text in a way that it makes sense when you really fully embody it. And when people will talk about like how, and we talk about it in the show, why is it still being done? Why, you know, why do we keep doing it? And I think that the idea is that yes, like that work is important. I also think equally important is to uphold and to raise up more BIPOC playwrights like Aaron here, you know, into spaces like Stratford, because that is how our visibility is going to get bigger. But of course, you know, at the end of the day, thinking as a producer, Shakespeare is going to be that thing that anchors a lot of audiences to a center. And so what is the ways to do it? The ways we did it, the ways that Stratford did it with Hamlet, the ways that Stratford did it with Allswell, you know, where they just do different casting. They tell the same story, but when you see that representation on stage, it hopefully will allow a young person to go like, I want to know more about this because I now see myself represented on stage, or looking through the program, I see myself represented in the creative team where I didn't before. And so I think that's my journey towards finding a newfound appreciation and love of Shakespeare, just purely as a mechanism for
like as a mechanism for change, rather than like what it was.
Exactly.
What it can be.
What it can be. Using this text and this body of work and these stories as a way to do that. I know that Shakespeare in the Rough is doing a indigenous-centric version of Othello, and I know that they're developing a indigenous version of Mackers. Well, almost said it, but I didn't.
And Peter Woodward now.
Yeah, exactly. So there are ways. I mean, it's in the culture, it's in the public domain. So I think it just takes really smart writers, not me, because I couldn't write my name to sign a check, you know, to get paid.
You gotta work on that.
I know, I do. I really
need to
do.
work on that.
I really do. But there's going to be better writers and better script adapters and dramaturgs that are going to take this Eurocentric body of work and find out how they can make it relevant to a contemporary audience, utilizing the community that this work should be serving, both not only in Toronto and Vancouver, but other smaller cultural centers as well too.
Which I think is good, because it's the thing that's ingrained. Like, we start learning Shakespeare when we're in high school, before we even go to university. And I think that because it starts so early and it is ingrained in our bodies, which is part of, you know, the colonialist adventure, it is good to look at it as to how we can change it and make it different, which is really what Jack was trying to do, I think, within this piece as well, was to show the comfort that we find in language that is put in our bodies at young ages and just kind of keeps cycling and cycling and cycling until it becomes something else.
And I don't know if that's going to go away. I don't know if the teaching of Shakespeare in school is ever really going to go away. You know, I think that there's going to be English teachers that are going to find different ways to acknowledge different types of playwrights and different authors and different bodies of work, especially if you're in a literary, in English lit class versus just being in a regular English class. But I think for the most part, Shakespeare is still the quote unquote standard. And so it's like, how are there ways to elevate it to make everyone excited or everybody take away something from it, as opposed to just reading the text? And it should really be seen, and like, it's really great that schools can come to Stratford and they can see and apply the body of work to words that they're just reading in a classroom.
Yeah, and see it lift off the page, because that's really what it's supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I wanted to just, before I open it up for questions, I just wanted to let you talk about some of the initiatives you're doing right now, or some of the work you're doing right now. So if you wanted to talk about the work you're creating right now, or any of the organizations that you're working with.
I'm working on a play here about table tennis, where we're building large-scale matches of table tennis through contemporary dance choreography. So I spent a year studying table tennis, played against it with a robot in a basement somewhere. They would shoot balls at me, I would try to hit them, terrible experience. And then I wrote a play about it, and these are like full-scale, real-time games that happen. And we've been kind of building them without a ball, without paddles, without a court. So it's all done through contemporary dance language.
Wow.
So that's what I'm developing through my Tarragon residency. My kind of focus on that is to how do I work with a choreographer, not just so it's like an ancillary dance thing, we work through narrative beats together. And which is why I think Cockroach is really interesting, because Myekah's doing that with Hannah right now. Like something that we talked about in a meeting we had a few weeks ago was that Mike's actually broken the script into units with Hannah that kind of elicit images and emotions and things, and then they kind of work in sync. So I'm trying to have a more interdisciplinary practice in building choreographic plays. Is kind of what I'm doing here.
Which there's a lot of choreography in Cockroach as well, so it's very, very cool that way.
So Aaron just explained what my job is. This is essentially at Cockroach, but yeah. So the thing that I'm working on right now is I'm the associate director of Cockroach. I think it's really nice that Mike wanted my voice in the room and wanted to just. Normally my contracts outside of Stratford has just been as an assistant. I just was an assistant director, assistant choreographer at Drayton for The Sound of Music. But I think that assistant and associate, if you don't know what they mean, sometimes I don't even know what they mean. I think what's in a name? A title means whatever. But in terms of the work environment, yeah, Mike and I and Hannah and everyone on the team it's really great about just how we're just always communicating and ripping ideas, and there's space and I have agency to put an idea forth and see if it works and if it lands, and if it doesn't, no hard feelings. So I'm doing that. I go back to Stratford in November, and I'm working on a couple of workshops, and then we start a second season because I get to be part of 2 seasons as part of the conservatory, and beyond that, I run a small independent theater company out of Vancouver called Fabulous Theater, and I have to do all the work satellite right now because I'm here. So
Sucks to suck.
It does. Luckily, I have a co-artistic director who's taking the brunt of that of those duties. But
Wait, you're also running an alliance too, right?
That's not even a thing. That's not even okay. So
I wrote that down. I don't know if is that real.
Right. So there's a Facebook group called the Asian Canadian Artists Alliance. It's just a Facebook group that I started. It's just a landing page really for me to share work of other Asian artists or for people to start posting about their body of work or asking questions to the group about hey, where can I really want to engage with an Asian artist or an Asian playwright or an Asian musician, and that's kind of the landing page for that. It's really just kind of unofficial. I know that there are more official things in the work. Boca de Lupo is creating an Asian Canadian, an association of Asian Canadian performing artists. So I don't know if we're going to be in tandem with that, but just that conversation about diversity and inclusion and equality is really important in my body of work. And so I'm always continuing to explore how I can be a co-conspirator and shake things up from the inside.
That's a grant word right there. You just want to grant with that word.
Yeah. Thank you, Lisa Karen Cox.
Yeah, she's so helpful.
She is so helpful.
So now I would just like to open the room up for any questions for my guests. Questions at all? Oh.
I'm really interested in hearing a little more about how you advance the narrative of a story through movement.
Yeah.
And I know that Hannah Keel is fluid body expression is doing that. You both referenced that in Cockroach. How does that work when you're working with a piece with text?
So I've written this dreaming very, very big. So the matches are actually written in the play like matches. I track every backhand, I track every point, I track when smashes are happening. So what I've done is, thanks actually to the mentorship I'm getting through the Urjo Kareda, is I've broken the script down to something I call units. I define a unit as when does the world change for every single character. In the upcoming workshop, we have broken down a 13-page scene into 20 emotional units.
Wow.
I then go through those emotional units, and we'll talk about this if this is wrong, we can talk about this later. But yeah, from those units, I work through with the choreographer. I talk about what is the story in this unit, but also what is the emotional idea? What emotions are we trying to elicit? What is the path of action? Jumping back to the workshop I did in May for this, we have built a choreographic language for table tennis. There's 3 worlds. There's a world of slowed down time where characters analyze each other's moves. There's a moment of the game where characters are cracking bounces on the ground. There's also a moment of panic attacks when characters enter panic attacks and their bodies change. So using those colors we built to paint with, we are going to start to build a choreographic track based on that unit work. I do the same when I direct text. So it's kind of like building my unit breakdown with text, but with a choreographer, who will then do movement experiments, but knowing where the worlds shift, and then building a track. So yeah, a little esoteric, but that's how we're working. I've never worked like this before. Usually I just work with pure text, but I've realized it's not that different from the way I work with text-based actors. It's just that like it's a different level of collaboration. Rather than talking, okay, what do you want here? What do you need here? It's like, what feeling are we trying to get by building this? Like in a moment where a character delivers a smash, is it a moment of victory? Is it a moment of failure? Is it a moment of road exhaustion? What is the audience also perceiving? So we're gonna start, I have another meeting with my choreographer this weekend, and we're gonna start by breaking down all the units into words, and then we're gonna start playing with fire next month when I'm in full workshop here for pretty much the entire month of September.
I can say that it's also very interesting for me, having grown up as a dancer in the more traditional sphere of tap jazz and like musical theater style and ballet and musical theater style dancing, watching Hannah work because that creating that language where it's like I understand and I can help support Hannah in my dance ability about tension and body language and movement and certain things that dancer vocabularies. But Hannah will also, because we're working with predominantly non-dancing people, non-dancer trained people, or specifically dancer trained people, the language is different, and the way, and like what Aaron was saying, the way that the show is described and the way that the show is moves through time and space, so much is informed by Hannah's work with, movement that is sometimes non-linear or very stylized, and it's beautiful to watch, and it's really interesting and really helpful to understand what that language means in working with Mike and how Mike is curating the text, and then working with Hannah and how that body of work is supported, and then with Deanna, our sound designer, about how those elements all come together to create a story that is hopefully going to be very clear to our audience.
It's very beautiful right now. It's just going to get more beautiful as we go forward. Yeah.
Are there any more questions?
All right. Well, I want to thank you all for joining us today for our Tarragon Talk around Cockroach. If you would like to stay for reception or ask our guests any further questions, you're totally welcome to. We'll be here for a little bit longer. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us tonight.